Chapter 91. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Darius and Ezekiel, together with the rest of the Abodian soldiers with him and some captives by the enemies, finally made their journey back to the camp. The werewolf king made sure that Tara was as comfortable as possible, and as she requested, she rode her own horse together with them. Tell me. Did you already know that Zen is a woman since the day I brought her to you for healing? Darius asked. They were riding at a slow pace within the wilderness, and Tara was riding closely enough to him for them to speak. Hearing him, she smiled as she replied, "Yes." Darius frowned as he then followed up, "And why didn't you say something? You didn't even correct me whenever I addressed her as a male." "That is because I know she had her reasons as to why she's in disguise in the first place," Tara explained herself. "I simply respected her decision. Besides, my duty at the time was only to heal her, and nothing more, sire." At the finality of her words, Darius no longer commented and simply nodded in understanding. Switching the topic, he expressed, "Zen will be delighted to see you. She's been curious, asking about why you suddenly left without even saying goodbye to her while she was in the castle." "Unfortunately, I had to leave to attend to an important matter, Your Majesty," Tara politely answered. As this conversation was going on, Ezekiel was quietly listening and observing the woman. Since the day Beirut warned him to be careful of a woman bearing icy blue eyes and silver hair, he had this habit of checking on every woman he met just to see if their eyes and hair color matched the seer's description. Letting out a small sigh, the prince fell into deep thought as he recalled his last conversation with Beirut. Their deceased seer had clearly mentioned that he must avoid a woman with his exact description of having long silver hair and icy blue eyes, lest he would bring damnation upon himself. Having had enough of being on the sidelines, Ezekiel strode forward and asked, "How did you end up being a captive?" The prince watched as the woman mulled over her answer. He was keenly observing her every expression and reaction, and he even wanted to ask if her hair was naturally black or if it was dyed. It moved softly against the breeze, as long prairie grass did against the autumn wind. "Last night, I was on my journey to Abodia when I was caught up in an ambush between Abodian and Helion soldiers. So many Abodians died, but luckily, some managed to escape," Tara recounted with a haunting tone in her voice. "I, unfortunately, was caught by the Helion soldiers. They kept me shackled together with the rest of the captives. Tonight, if you didn't arrive in time. I'm really grateful that you came. Once again, thank you. Enough with the constant gratitude. You were lucky that we attacked in time, but I must say that you didn't even look scared at the time," Ezekiel voiced out, having noticed that her eyes have nary a hint of fear in them during that time. It was more of a dead look, a soulless one that somehow alerted him that something was amiss. "That's because I knew you will come, Your Highness," Tara simply answered, making Ezekiel's frown deepen at the implication. "What do you mean?" he suspiciously asked. "I have seen this event coming, Your Highness," Tara lightly bowed as she explained. "Although you came to that camp for vengeance, the rest of us were saved as a result of your actions." Ezekiel reined in his horse to a halt, the rest following suit as they all waited for him to continue. His eyes bore at Tara as he whispered, "You. How did you? I'm not just a healer, but I'm also a seer, Your Highness, someone who could see not only the future, but I think I also have the ability to see into the past as well," Tara admitted. "That was why I was making my way to Abodia in the first place, to seek guidance from Abodia's seer himself. But unfortunately, that won't happen anymore since I met him at the wrong place and time. Where I witnessed him die last night," the woman gravely said. It took a while for Ezekiel to gather his senses after hearing such revelations. What the woman just said didn't seem to register in his mind as it slowly sank in. She was a seer. They had lost Beirut, and here she was coming in just in time for her to replace him. Could she be the one that Beirut was looking for? The one that he mentioned would take over his position once he was gone. But Beirut's search had been futile. He was unable to find the one while he was looking for his own successor. Brother. In law, we must continue moving. It was Darius's voice that snapped him back to his senses as he blinked away his confusion. He still had a lot of questions to ask, but they could wait. For now, they needed to keep moving. He nodded at Darius and authoritatively instructed the men who had stopped behind him, "Let's get moving." Directing his horse to move, he kept his eyes on Terra even as they moved. A seer, he mused, doubt still lingering inside of him. There was a time and place for questions, and now wasn't the time for them. He then shifted his gaze to the werewolf king and shook his head. It seemed like the king was already accustomed to calling him, brother.in.law. Perhaps he should address him in the same manner. "I'm surprised Xenia didn't insist on tagging along with me last night," Ezekiel casually commented. "I stopped her from doing so," Darius replied. "She's not in the right condition to fight with you right now. I assured her that I will accompany you and keep you safe, and I did. Besides, it'll be better for her to stay at the camp and personally arrange the sending off of your former seer. A proper burial rite, if you will." "Good call," Ezekiel nodded. "I'm glad that Xenia at least listened to you. She had always been stubborn, the type who wouldn't listen to anyone except for herself." "I'll take that advice as you acknowledging me already as your brother.in.law, Darius said with a pleased smile. Ezekiel couldn't help but chuckle at the king's declaration. Darius wasn't a bad choice for Xenia, and he could sense that the king would be good to his sister even in the little time and interactions he had with him. He would at least be the first person who managed to hold Xenia's reins without her going wild, and that was already an advantage for anyone that might want to court his sister. "Well, what can I do? It seems like you and my sister are destined to be together," Ezekiel shrugged. "Just make sure you will never hurt her and make her cry, because if you do, then I won't hesitate to decapitate you myself. And you choose now of all times to threaten me, brother.in.law." Darius scoffed, enjoying his small banter with Xenia's brother. "It's not a threat, but a warning," Ezekiel replied, copying Darius's words from before. "I'm sure you'll understand." Chapter 92. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Xenia was already fully awake, but she remained in her tent as she let herself gather her bearings. Jaira had already briefed her on what she could expect once she arrived at Cordon as Darius's mate and wife, and it was a load of information that somewhat helped her in keeping herself occupied rather than blaming herself for what happened to Beirut. She knew that she shouldn't be thinking like that, but... she breathed out, her tightening chest somewhat easing as she took in a deep breath. She should be out there and showing off her strength. She had to set a good example to her people, especially now that Ezekiel was still not back from their planned ambush. Putting herself together, Xenia nodded to herself as she got ready before finally going out of her tent. Looking around, everyone was busy, even though the undeniable dimness of the atmosphere was painting a bleak backdrop to their preparations. Taking her first step, she was immediately greeted by every Abodian she passed with respect and courtesy. Walking towards what seemed to be some kind of commotion, she frowned as she saw Princess Esme. She was laughing hard together with her peers, and Gideon and Bardas were with her as well as they all shared a conversation. She was about to approach when her face suddenly darkened, having recalled the incident wherein the Valkyries princess had invaded her privacy not just inside Darius's tent, but also in her dreams. Vampires had the power to enter a human's dream, and doing so without her permission didn't sit right with her. "Look who's finally out. And here I thought our princess has decided to enjoy a very deep sleep for yet another whole day," the vampire princess sarcastically announced. Taking another deep breath, Xenia partly held her breath before she forced a smile to greet the vampire princess with. Esme was a part of the alliance, and she should avoid getting into a misunderstanding with her to try and avoid a diplomatic incident. She should also remember that this princess could mistreat her sister Minnie back in Valkyries should she play her cards wrong. "Good morning, milady," she greeted, also giving off a slight bow to Bardas and Gideon by the side. "Oh please. Call me Esme. I'm younger than you, after all, what with me being 20 and you being 20.1. At least, that's how I recall it," Esme chuckled before taking on a more somber look. By the way, I want to apologize for last night. It was rude of me to barge in like that, and for that, I'm sorry. You see, I'm used to barging in and out of Darius's personal space whenever I want without permission. It's an old habit of mine. Xenia withheld her judgment as she listened to her fellow princess's apology. She was vulgar with her words, but the former could still sense the hidden meaning behind her vampire counterpart's words. Did she really like Darius in a romantic way? She inwardly thought with a slight frown. Her lips twitched. Somehow, she was displeased at the thought of Esme liking Darius. Should I just pull out all your hair, you blood-sucking female bat? She inwardly retorted. She really didn't like the vampire princess at all. It all started when this Esme bluntly declared her disapproval of Minnie, saying that her sister is cursed without even so much as an apology afterwards. Xenia almost let her eyes roll as she let her emotions get the better of her. She was usually a good actress, being able to play various expressions with but a thought. However, she was far from being in the mood to play the damsel in distress against the woman in front of her right now. Still, she reminded herself to be nice to the vampiress, if only for the sake of her Minnie, who was now under the care of Valcrez. I see. I suppose I'll have to let it slide just this once. After all, you're my sisters-in-law, and mistakes are needed for us to learn, don't you agree? Xenia coolly replied. Also, you should start respecting Darius's privacy more, especially now that it's not only his privacy that you're breaching but also that of his mates as well. I will appreciate it if you will change your old habits regarding Darius's privacy then, Noel.N. Inwardly, Xenia cringed at her own words. Why do I even care? I sound like some possessive mate of his at this rate. She was only glad that Darius wasn't around to hear her. She was being irrational again. She really had to start changing that. Is that so? But you're now staying in a different tent now, right? I'm sure Darius wouldn't mind my old habits, seeing as his mate doesn't care either, Esme courteously countered. Although, I guess that's just you giving me enough leeway to continue invading Darius's privacy. How thoughtful of you, Princess Xenia. I can't thank you enough, the vampiress slightly bowed with a grin. This Xenia was out for words. She had never met someone as unreasonable and crazy as this woman in front of her before. The princess was even obviously mocking her with her sweet voice and smile. Is she testing my patience? Her face reddened as she clenched her jaw. The vampiress was getting under her skin. Seeing the brewing tension between the two, Gideon suddenly chuckled and said, "Ah, Princess Xenia. Please don't take Princess Esme's words to heart. You see, she was born like this. It's her nature to be a free spirit, always blabbering about nonsense and playing pranks on just about anyone to her heart's content. It's her playful nature. She's basically a child trapped inside a woman's body." Hearing the man's words, Xenia managed to calm herself down. Turning to him, she scoffed, "It's all right, Gideon. I didn't take it to heart, and I've heard that our Princess Esme indeed has quite a remarkable reputation. It's a breath of fresh air to experience it personally, really." Esme only raised an eyebrow at Gideon as she commented with a serious demeanor. "Who says I wasn't being serious? I'm being vocal about it right now. This mate thing on werewolves is just absurd. Darius, as the king of Corden, deserves someone powerful to rule by his side. He can't have someone weak dragging him down. And when I say weak, that means not just physically, but emotionally as well." Xenia tightly pressed her lips together as she tried to manage her temper. Forcing a beautiful smile onto her lips, she politely rebutted, "I didn't know that the Princess of Valcrez has a lot of free time in her hands for her to easily judge someone's character. I am not weak. And hold that thought. I smell something delicious." Xenia frowned as Esme cut her, turning to follow the princess's movements as the vampiress ran towards a particular direction. It would seem that her brother Ezekiel and Darius had finally arrived, along with the rest of their men as they marched into camp. Watching the vampire princess, she blinked as the woman sniffed at the arriving men as they passed her by. "What is she doing?" she murmured with a wrinkled forehead. "She's an eccentric vampiress, please don't mind her, milady," Gideon sighed. "She just smells something delicious among humans. And whoever that human is, I'm already feeling bad for him or her." Shrugging at Gideon's words, Xenia shifted her gaze back to the crowd to look for Darius, who was already staring at her as soon as their eyes met. She bit her lower lips as she thought, should I go back to staying in his tent? What a dilemma, a simple question that the vampire had triggered within her, A/N. Do you think Xenia should stay at Darius's tent or not? Tell me your thoughts. Wink E/N. No, not really. Then again, I have no significant power over the story, so don't worry, dear readers. Chapter 93. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As much as Xenia didn't want to lose in the apparent battle of intense eye contact with Darius, she had no choice but to be the first to look away. She simply couldn't last against his blazing gaze. It was like he was devouring her with those predatory eyes of his. Already, she could see the tainted blood staining the armor and weapons of their men. It had been a bloody fight, it seemed, with their rage burning in their hearts to avenge their well-respected seer. Almost instantly, their mages and healers quickly approached them to attend to the wounded. Darius also had dried blood on him, but he still wore his armor despite it, indicating that he fought in his human form even though she could also see dried blood on his arms and hands. He probably also used his sharp claws, seeing as she remembered how Darius would use his claws even though he was still in his human form. We're fine, sister, so stop doing a vague assessment with just your eyes, Ezekiel teased her. Hearing her brother, Xenia promptly ignored him as her eyes darted back towards Darius, making sure to assess him from head to toe in an effort to look for any injuries. She then heaved out a sigh of relief after making sure that both Darius and her brother were indeed fine and free of injuries. It was only then that she dragged her gaze onto others, her eyes widening upon seeing a familiar figure that was helping their healers in attending to the wounded. "Tara," she called out, even blinking just to make sure she saw her clearly. After a few moments of making sure that what she was seeing was correct, her lips instantly curled up, Tara also smiling back at her as they met each other's gaze. Burning with excitement, Xenia immediately rushed towards Tara, sharing a hug with the healer as they both greeted one another. "You just left without even saying a word," she murmured as she broke the hug, a smile still on her face as she faced the healer. "I had to, princess. I know we'll meet again soon anyway," Tara replied with a pleased and knowing smile. "Oh right, you're a seer." Xenia unknowingly blurted out loudly, her eyes widening as she covered her mouth. She had almost forgotten that Tara was like Beirut for a second there. "You know she's a seer," her brother Ezekiel interrupted, making Xenia nod in confirmation. Giving Tara a passing glance, he then turned back to her and asked in his low tone, "How's the burial?" "Wizard Lurio arranged for the master's ashes to be safely stored. We also built a tent for it so that anyone can visit and pay their respect while the war is still ongoing," Xenia reported. "We'll return with his ashes back to our kingdom once all of this is over." She then asked, "What's with all the civilians?" Ezekiel nodded at the princess's words. Looking back at the captives they freed from Helion's camp, he let out a sigh as he gave out his own report. "They're the captives we freed from the enemy camp," he explained. "And while I'd want them to stay and recuperate with freedom, I simply cannot take the risk of letting them stay for too long. Helion is too cunning, so I instructed Atlas to gather all the captives we brought in all into one place. We'll have them properly treated and taken care of, all while being supervised and tightly guarded by our soldiers. The risk of having a spy inside our encampment is simply too high." Ezekiel hung his words, his eyes dragging towards Tara's suspicious presence. "For what it's worth, I understand your sentiments, my lord," Tara replied with a knowing look. Ezekiel let out another sigh before he instructed everyone that went with him in the battle to rest. Meanwhile, those that didn't join the ambush were ordered to attend to the captives and do what was needed for their comfortable stay. Once all was said and done, the prince then asked Jaira to help Tara get settled. However, I would like to help tend to the wounded, Your Highness, Tara politely requested. Hearing her request, Ezekiel nodded in agreement. All help was appreciated, and it was only fortunate to have more healers, even if they were a tad suspicious than most people. As soon as Tara left, Ezekiel turned to Jaira and said, "Look after her, Jaira. We're not sure if she can be fully trusted." "I understand, Your Highness," Jaira quickly replied, immediately moving to follow the suspicious healer into the fray of the wounded. After seeing to his suspicions, Ezekiel then looked at Xenia and Darius and said, "I will need to speak to the two of you." Xenia simply followed as her brother walked forward, leading them towards his tent as her and Darius followed him from behind. "How are you feeling?" Darius asked her. He had a blank expression on his face, making Xenia wonder what exactly was going on inside his head. "I'm feeling better. Thank you," she whispered out in reply. Somehow, the matter of her new arrangements popped up inside her head. After Ezekiel had talked to them, she planned to inform Darius about her moving to another tent. How would he react? Did she even want to know what kind of reaction he'd show her? After a few moments of walking, they were finally inside Ezekiel's tent, the latter promptly turning to face them as he spoke with his eyes trained solely on her. "I'm only doing this as a precautionary measure, but you practically didn't know anything about Tara except for the fact that she's a healer and a seer, right?" Ezekiel began. "If so, then you shouldn't put your guard down around her. Make sure you carefully watch her every move. She'll be your responsibility from now on." Darius raised an eyebrow at the prince's words. An obvious question was being left unasked, judging by the look on his face. "Are you doubting her?" Xenia inquired. Tara seemed to be a good person, and she honestly liked her. "She has ice blue eyes," Ezekiel murmured. "But she doesn't have silver white hair," Xenia countered. "I thought those two traits should come hand in hand." She then added, "You know, I think it'll be better if you're the one to watch her carefully, brother. I'm not really good at reading people, and you're well aware of that fact since you often scolded me about it back in the day." Hearing her reasonable proposition, Ezekiel helplessly looked at Darius and said, "Then it'll be King Darius's responsibility. He's the one who suggested bringing Tara with us as a token of his gratitude in the first place. Wasn't that what you said in the first place?" Darius scoffed. "Very well." Hearing her brother's request, Xenia frowned as she stated, "No. Why would you ask the king for such an absurd task? You should be responsible for Tara from now on. Don't ask Darius about such a thing." She then turned around with a scoff, "Now, if you'll excuse us, we'll be taking our leave now. I also need to talk to Darius in private, and we're already burning daylight as it is." Without any fuss, Xenia quickly left the tent, her brother's words sitting unacceptable to her the more she thought about it. Why would he ask Darius to look after that woman? It's so absurd, she annoyingly mused. Xenia was too deep in her thoughts that she failed to notice how wide Darius's smile was at the moment. It almost reached his ears as he followed Xenia's back, the princess walking towards Darius's tent without her noticing his eyes. Chapter 94. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Darius couldn't help but smile as he followed Xenia into his tent. He had never felt that kind of feeling before, and it was something that he simply couldn't explain even to himself. It was far from the norm, but the moment he arrived from battle and saw Zen waiting like that, checking on him and assessing if he was wounded or not, it was gladdening. He clearly saw the concern in her eyes, and because of that, he was on cloud nine. And to add even more excitement to his already fluttering heart, her reaction just now when Ezekiel asked him to look after Tara was something he really loved. "Look at you grinning ear to ear like that. Discounting the fact that it was your suggestion in the first place, I think it all worked out in the end," Zeus chuckled with blissful glee. "Well, she's jealous. If she wasn't, then she wouldn't care about whether or not you look after any woman. It was perfect. She didn't even bother looking at Atlas earlier, Darius having noticed how Zen's eyes glued themselves solely at him and her brother as soon as they arrived. He's her brother, so I don't need to get jealous about him, Darius noted. He was honestly afraid that Xenia would worry more about Atlas, which made it all the sweeter when it wasn't the case. Following Zen inside the tent, he was eager to crush her in his arms as he kept himself in check. He was aware that he should control himself for now, with Gideon having given him a quick telepathic report about the current situation. Zen was about to turn around and face him when Darius quickly wrapped his arms around her, ignoring all sense of control as he whispered into her ear, "I missed you. I'm glad you're feeling better now, Zen. You just lost someone dear to you, but the living must continue on in moving forward. After all, that would have been that person's wish in the first place. They wouldn't want us to grieve for too long, but that also doesn't mean we must forget about them. We'll keep the good memories we had with them in our hearts." Xenia's eyes widened at his words, but he wasn't done as he continued. "I know what you wanted to talk about. Gideon already telepathically informed me that you moved to another tent," Darius preemptively explained. "Let me just hug you like this for a while. I'll let you go afterwards and give you the space you need. You can go back to your own tent after this." Zen didn't respond, and as usual, Darius took her silence as a yes. They simply stood there unmoving for quite some time, with him hugging her from behind and drowning himself in her intoxicating scent. "I should leave now, my king. In the meantime, you need a good bath, seeing as you actually stink right now," Zen commented. "Let me get the servants to prepare you a bath." Darius chuckled at her words. He probably smelled like rotten meat by now since he had the dried blood of their enemies on him, but all of that paled in comparison to Zen's alluring scent overpowering his nose. Letting out a heavy sigh, he listlessly loosened his arms around her and let her go. "All right. Go before I change my mind, Zen," Darius told her. "Though, I must confess that it's quite hard for me to do this, even if I understand and respect that this is what you wanted." "Thank you," Zen whispered before she quickly turned to leave his tent. "I'll wait for you to come back to me, so please don't take too long," he added before Zen's back totally disappeared. "Ha! You'll definitely not gonna last," Zeus scoffed. "But I am curious as to how long you can take being away from her." Darius let out another heavy sigh. Hopefully, she wouldn't take too long. Zeus will be insufferable in teasing him the longer she took her time. Outside Darius's tent, Xenia stopped in her tracks for a while as she closed her eyes. She actually didn't at all to end like that. She was actually ready to get into a debate with the werewolf king because she just assumed that he wouldn't let her go with how possessive he could be. So seeing what just happened, with Darius actually letting her go, caught her off guard. With a breath, she opened her eyes and looked up at the bright sky. She was somehow comforted by Darius's words, with him talking about grief and moving forward. Flashing a faint smile, she thought about how Beirut would actually agree with Darius. The seer wouldn't want her to blame herself over something like his death. He wouldn't want her to have any kind of angst for that matter. Xenia nodded to herself. She wouldn't grieve long, but she will always keep the good memories she had with her master to heart, somehow who had taken a special part of her life since the day she was born. She took in another deep breath and released it with ease. Her lips curled up contently as she glanced back at Darius's tent. Since when did he become this considerate? Even now, she could still feel his warmth in her body, even if he indeed stunk of death and decay. She couldn't care less. She felt at ease anyway. Chuckling to herself, Xenia was in a very good mood as she asked the servants to prepare everything Darius might need for the day. She then headed towards her own tent, not stopping for anything as she practically skipped in her step. However, what's going on with her? She creased her forehead as her eyes darted towards a particular direction. Specifically, towards the naughty vampire princess following Atlas around. Is she following Atlas around? The princess murmured out with a frown. There you are, Bedo de Xenia's ears perked up at the familiar voice. Turning to her, Jaira gave her a tired smile as she spoke to her. Ah! My head is spinning already. Prince Ezekiel gave me a task to look after Terra, but it's more like I have to spy on her, Jaira sighed. I'm so busy with a lot of important things on my hands. How about you help me, milady? Please. I'm not good at spying. How about no? Xenia teased. Ah. Although, I have a better idea. And what is that, exactly? Xenia asked with a raised brow, seeing the mischievous smile on her friend's face. Why don't you assign Terra to be His Highness's personal servant instead? I mean, that way he'll be able to watch her closely himself. You know, keep your enemies closer and all that, Jaira suggested. If he's right with his suspicion about Terra being a spy, then he'll know immediately. Besides, I'm sure you two wouldn't want to babysit Terra, right? Why not give it a try? You're the only person who has the power to go against the prince's word, so, hearing the desperation in her friend's voice, Xenia sighed as she simply murmured, I'll think about it, Jaira. Thanks, Jaira weakly chuckled in gratitude. In all honesty though, I do feel that something's off. Huh? Haven't you noticed how Prince Ezekiel looked at Terra? It's too intense. I think he's smitten, Jaira hypothesized, making Xenia chuckle at her words. There's a story to it, Jaira, so the look you noticed earlier is probably not the look of someone that's smitten, Xenia corrected. It's more on the cautious and suspicious side, really. Jaira shook her head as she scoffed, poor werewolf king. He'll surely need a lot of patience with you, milady. Just how dense can you be? Chapter 95. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Darius went out of his tent as soon as his moonlight cavalry arrived at the Abodian encampment. Your Majesty, Xandro, the commander of his moonlight cavalry, bowed to him together with a few of his chosen men from the cavalry. The rest of our soldiers are already on stand.by at the assigned location as per your Majesty's suggestions. As you predicted, Helion's main army stopped marching near the Badig Gulf, and had set their encampment there to resupply. Darius nodded at the news. It was indeed as he predicted, but knowing how cunning the Demon King himself was, Darius knew that there was more to these moves than meets the eye. After a while, Lurio, Ebodia's head wizard, approached Darius with a slight bow and said, Your Majesty, the prince has asked for you and your officers' presence for an important meeting. Please come to the command tent once you're available. Darius simply nodded. It seemed as if there was more work to be done, but first, he had a few orders to give out for his newly arrived men. After discussing a few important details with his own officers, Darius immediately headed to the command tent along with some of his trusted men. By the time Darius arrived, everyone has already gathered inside the tent. Everybody of importance was present, and Prince Ezekiel didn't waste any time in starting the meeting as soon as everyone was fully situated. With a wave of his hand, the discussion of their plans and tactics for the battlefield together with the reinforcements coming from Valkrez and Cordon led by Princess Esme and Darius himself respectively had finally begun. Once again, I thank both of you for coming, Ezekiel started, looking at both Esme and Darius with a slight bow. Truly, I am overwhelmed by the assistance each of your powerful kingdoms are providing for our lands. With our combined might, I'm sure that we'll succeed in not letting Helion achieve their goals of conquering our lands. At his heartfelt thanks, the two answered the prince with a curt nod. Darius's eyes darted at Esme as he then spoke, Esme, I understand that your brother Nikolai just got married. However, I couldn't help but feel worried that he sent you here to lead Valkrez's reinforcements in his stead. Hearing the king's words, Esme's face soured as she scoffed, Huh. My brother simply honored the Abodian tradition for newlyweds to not go to the battlefield. Her eyes then turned to Xenia as she scoffed with lifted brows, from the looks of it, Abodians have so many beliefs and fussy things with them that you yourself should be wary of, Darius, she let out a laugh, Ha. How many days do you have to count before you could even marry her, huh? I just hope you won't die in this battle without even marking and claiming your mate. Blinking plainly, Darius promptly ignored Esme's words, knowing full well that it was only natural for her to be this rude. She wouldn't be Esme if she wasn't demeaning someone every few minutes or so. Watching her, Darius casually sighed as Esme aimed her blinking honey gold eyes at his as if she was showing him pity. It was then that he regretted the fact that he even mentioned Nikolai being absent. Truth to be told, he simply wanted to reiterate to everyone inside the room that he personally wasn't even needed to participate in this war. He had capable commanders to represent him, and it was actually more logical for him to simply sit back and let his subjects work for him. However, he chose to personally be present simply because he wanted to show Xenia how sincere he was in attending to Abodia's affairs. A beat passed, and a mischievous smile suddenly curved on Esme's lips as if she was able to read his thoughts. He was just sure that this troublemaker could see right through him again. Must I elaborate to you, King Darius, that the actions we're taking are our kingdom showing our sincerity to Abodia in regards to the marriage alliance? Esme pointed out. If you think about it, brother sending his most favorite sibling to a bloodbath is the proper move to make. That way, Abodia won't be offended that he wasn't around in person while the Cordonian king himself is showing off his presence like this. Darius only chuckled as he countered, fair. Although, I bet Nikolai can breathe more properly whenever you're out of his sight. Seeing how Esme's face soured at his words, Darius triumphantly grinned. He probably just hit her on the right spot to elicit such a response. What are you saying? He didn't even want to send me here, Esme grunted with a pout. I was the one who insisted on coming here. What do you know? You're only here because of your mate. Alright, let's not prolong this argument since we have more important things to discuss, Darius quickly commented, completely dodging the issue as his eyes shifted back to Ezekiel. Apologies for the inconvenience. Giving out a slight nod of acknowledgement, Ezekiel simply chuckled, It's all right, Your Majesty. It's a breath of fresh air against the bleak backdrop of war. Letting them all get settled once more, Ezekiel then began discussing some of the minutiae of their plans while using the map and miniatures spread across the table. At the moment, my cavalry are already positioned in their designated spots. Helion's main army has set up camp here, while the battlefield will probably take place here in the plains right before the Badig Gulf, Darius pointed out. We'll meet each other in the middle here, but I feel like something's off. Ezekiel stared at the map and whispered, This part here is the Forbidden Forest, and no one would dare enter this part since. The prince trailed off, he and Darius staring at each other as if they just had the same thought. Esme rolled her eyes as she interrupted, Nobody can enter it and come out alive, we get it. They won't even come out normal anymore, and demons are no exemption either. She shrugged, really, they should just rename that forest to the soul-sucking energy forest already. The Forbidden Forest was a place inhabited by all kinds of souls wandering about, feeding on all living things that might stumble across their reach. Said forest was located at the western part of Abodia's borders, and it occupied the majority of the southwest part of Cordon. It was one of the main reasons why Helion couldn't breach Cordon, the only safe path for them to conquer the kingdom being through Abodian lands. Are they always like that? Xenia chimed in, sitting beside Gideon as she whispered. What do you mean, milady? Gideon whispered back. Darius and the vampire princess, she trailed off, not explaining any further as she mumbled. If Gideon didn't catch on to what she meant, then she wouldn't bother to elaborate further. She was somehow distracted. She felt like Esme and Darius were close enough that they could talk casually to each other without a care for their surroundings or what other people might think. Don't worry, that's just how they usually act. It's their usual banter, and you haven't even seen the worst yet, Gideon whispered out, making sure that nobody could hear him. You see, Princess Esme is actually pretty infatuated with His Majesty. Hearing that new piece of information, Xenia frowned as her eyes keenly observed the interactions between Esme and Darius. A/N. Any thoughts on Esme? Lols. Chapter 96. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The meeting continued forward, and Ezekiel was opening the floor up for various opinions and suggestions when Tara suddenly barged inside. Tara! Xenia burst, alarmed as she noticed Ezekiel's dim expression. Danger, Tara murmured out after making sure that everyone inside the room was looking at her. Danger is coming. Standing up, Xenia quickly approached the seer and held her. Taking her hands to her own, the princess's eyes widened when felt how cold Tara's hands were. What's going on? Ezekiel called out. This is a confidential area, and no one is allowed to. I know. I'm so sorry, Your Highness, but I saw danger coming, Tara apologized. Her eyes then widened as her gaze darted towards Commander Xandro, who was about to drink some water from his cup. Don't drink that. Tara shouted, causing the commander to stop raising the cup to his mouth. What for? The commander asked with a frown. I see people dying here because of the water, Tara shakily whispered. Beside her, Xenia could feel Tara's body shaking heavily. Despite the lack of evidence, she had a feeling that Tara was telling the truth. She might not have been someone who believed in seers, but a part of her had a feeling. Looking at Ezekiel, whose face had darkened ever since Tara arrived, she couldn't help but see the doubt lingering over her brother's eyes. In that instant, Xenia looked at Atlas and declared, quickly. Tell everyone not to drink water. Yes, Your Highness. Heeding her words, Atlas quickly got outside the tent to prevent everyone else from drinking any water. Xenia's eyes then darted at Lurio as she said, Please see and check if our water supply is poisoned. Yes, Your Highness, the wizard responded, immediately following Atlas outside to look into the matter. Back inside the tent, Ezekiel glared at Tara as he warned, If you're lying, then I suggest. However, before Ezekiel could finish his words, Xenia was already on the seer's defense. Stop it. I can feel that Tara isn't lying. Her hands right now are cold and sweaty, and I can even feel her rapid pulse. Xenia firmly defended. Let her rest. Shaking her head, she carefully led Tara onto a nearby seat so that the seer could calm down and relax. Sitting down, Tara's eyes were welling up as she whispered, So many people dying in my vision. They were all vomiting blood, and, the Dark Witch, it's all right, Tara, you can tell it all to us slowly, Xenia encouraged. She remembered Tara mentioning to her before how everything was currently known to her, that she herself was still adjusting to the visions that constantly came to her back when they were together at Cordon. Letting Tara reorient herself, everyone inside the tent remained silent, all of them curiously waiting for the seer's next words. Who is she? A new seer. Esme broke the silence. Isn't Ebodia's seer dead? She's Tara, the one who healed Zen back to health back when she was heavily wounded, Darius helpfully commented. I see that, but from where is she from? Esme suspiciously added. From what kingdom does she hail from? She was a wanderer like Zen. At least, that was what she told us before, Gideon replied. She heals people from one place to another. From kingdom to kingdom, then. That's enough, Xenia interrupted with a pointed stare. As she told me before, she's still trying to handle her gift, and all the noise isn't making it any easier. And she's wandering around because she's looking for answers, simply following the guidance of her gift as she wanders the lands. A tense silence settled after that, the occupants of the tent keeping their thoughts to themselves as they waited for something to happen. Soon, Lurio returned along with Atlas. The water is poisoned, Your Highness, Atlas cautiously reported. It's only a good thing that we detected it this quickly. A few of our men who already drank the water are being attended by our healers and mages as we speak. They said they can still save them, seeing as the poison hasn't reached any of their vital organs yet. You must find him. He will escape, Tara murmured out. She closed her eyes, then tilted her head. Everyone gasped as a white light illuminated Tara's body, her black hair slowly turning silver white. Xenia stared at the scene in disbelief. Her then eyes turned to Ezekiel, who obviously looked terrified as he watched the scene unfold. "She's the seer." Beirut's successor, Wizard Lurio blurted out, tears welling in his eyes as he added, "She's the one. She will keep Ebodia safe." Blinking at the mystical occurrence in front of her, Xenia was still in awe as she stared dumbfounded. She would keep their kingdom safe. But, could she also be the one to bring ruin to her brother Ezekiel? He will escape. The man is wearing Ebodia's armor, and he has a tattoo of a black serpent on his back, Tara whispered as soon as she opened her eyes. He's a spy from Helion. A brief silence echoed throughout the tent after that. After what felt like ages, its occupants finally sprung into action. "Ezekiel!" Xenia called out to her brother to snap him back to his senses. Ezekiel almost flinched in surprise. He then blinked before he declared, "Search every man and woman out there. Bring me that spy." Seeing the commotion about to unfold, Darius looked at Gideon and Bardas as he instructed, "Help with the search." He then looked at Esme, who simply sighed deeply before she looked at her right-hand man. "Tell our men to help the Ebodian soldiers with the search," Esme sighed. As the rest of them disappeared out of the tent, Xenia remained inside, refusing to leave Tara's side as she soothed her. Looking at Ezekiel, his eyes met with hers, the latter only gulping as his eyes then shifted back to Tara. Already, Xenia could tell that her brother was too torn as to what to do. A seer played an important part in their kingdom, and now. This is good news. The despair in our men will be lifted once the news spreads, Lurio declared. Everyone will be delighted and inspired once they learn that Ebodia is once again receiving a seer from the Almighty. It's exactly like how it's been prophesied. Shaking his head, Ezekiel closed his eyes as he helplessly sat on his chair. Xenia sighed deeply, dragging her eyes back to Tara as she helped the seer. "My hair," Tara murmured out, her hands gingerly holding onto her stray strands. Only now did she notice how her long black hair had changed color. "It seems you found your home, milady," Lurio explained with a nod. "Your hair had turned white because you've finally ascended. According to our former seer, you will ascend to your power once you embrace your gift to protect the ruler you're about to serve, just like how Beirut ascended in front of our King Stefan." Hearing the story, Esme let out a scoff. "I hate to ruin the mood, but there are other rulers present here," Esme casually pointed out. "I'm a princess of Valkrez, and there's Darius, a king of Cordon. How could you be so sure that she ascended in Prince Ezekiel's presence?" Xenia shook her head. Somehow, this vampire princess never failed to annoy her. She stood up and said, "Tell me, princess, did you somehow obtain a mark like this?" With a raised eyebrow, Xenia showed the mark that suddenly appeared on the back of Tara's left hand. It was a dragon tattoo, one that wrapped against the back of her hand. "Just from the mark alone, it represents our symbol, don't you think?" Xenia pointed out. "A dragon." Chapter 97. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Esme ignored Xenia with a roll of her eyes. Instead, she turned to Darius and curiously asked, "Do you have one?" "The mark." Darius kept his silence, ignoring her words with a simple shrug. Seeing the king's reactions, Esme frowned as she then turned to Lurio. With a pout, she asked, "Is there a particular part of the body that we have to check? Or will it just appear in any part of the body?" Xenia rolled her eyes at Esme's actions. Certain details about seers and mages should be confidential, only known to the royals and high-ranking officials of the kingdom in an effort to keep some aces up their sleeves. These things shouldn't even be discussed out in the open, most especially to outsiders. Lurio turned to look at her brother Ezekiel, as if asking for approval for him to speak. When Ezekiel nodded, Lurio explained, "You will feel a pricking pain once it happens, a burning sensation flitting on your skin once the mark appears." Xenia sighed at the decision made in front of her. At the very least, the circumstances right now didn't afford them to keep some of their secrets and valuable information to themselves. For all intents and purposes, the people inside the tent were allies, ones that could be trusted with such secrets. Although, this vampire princess still got under her skin despite her efforts. Still, the fact remained that they might as well all be family. Her sister Mini was married to the vampiress's brother, after all, and it only meant that they should start fostering a closer relationship than usual. I don't feel a thing in my body, however, Darius commented with a frown. I guess I don't have it. Shaking her head, Xenia bit her inner cheek as she kept her emotions in check at the sight before her. Esme checked on Darius's exposed skin for the mark, and it was making her feel things that she didn't want to feel. Ah, Darius, what if it's in your butt cheeks? Esme playfully teased with a wicked smile. In fact, would you like to check on one another in private? It might be somewhere we can't see on our own. Xenia felt something cling onto her throat as she unknowingly coughed. With a dim face, she shot a deadly stare at the two. Meanwhile, Esme simply had a taunted smile as she naively shrugged her shoulders at her. Her fellow princess was obviously enjoying seeing her annoyed. Having enough, Xenia opened her mouth to speak, but she quickly stopped upon hearing Lurio's voice. Your Highness, your right hand, Lurio whispered with eyes open wide. Hearing the wizard's words, Xenia looked in her brother's direction, Ezekiel's gaze still locked into Terra while Lurio stared into the prince's hand. Curious, with click of her tongue, Esme walked towards Ezekiel and looked at his hand. She then walked to Terra and stared at the seer's hand before coming to her own conclusions. Wow! The mark SS the same. Isn't that great? Esme chuckled. I guess Ebodian royals seem to have their destiny preordained like history says they do. How nice. Your kingdom may be physically weaker being mostly comprised of humans, but you are all blessed with an abundance of seers and mages. Xenia sighed deeply at Esme's words. It was true. Mages and seers were Ebodia's greatest strengths. Their kingdom was the only kingdom that had enough knowledge on white spells and magic, and they even had a sacred sanctuary for those chosen Ebodians who had willingly pledged and vowed their loyalty and life to the kingdom. Of course, if someone broke that pledge and vow, they would automatically lose their life, seeing as their vows had a spell woven into it. Meanwhile, on the subject of the mark between the ruler and the seer, it didn't always show in a particular spot of the body. For instance, her father's mark was on his nape, while Beirut's mark was on his arm. Deep in thought, Xenia worriedly looked at Ezekiel. He had a blank expression on his face, but Xenia knew that her brother was bothered. This mark was also a sign that it was Ezekiel's time to reign as the king of Ebodia. Although things seem to be preordained, that doesn't mean that we will force you to do things against your will, Terra. You can always go and free yourself from all of this, Ezekiel finally spoke, his amber eyes not batting an eyelid against Terra. Yes. A seer is a big help to our kingdom, but I think it's also already time that we don't rely on them. You are free from this obligation, and we won't keep you with us to do this for Ebodia. Brother, Prince Ezekiel, both Lurio and Xenia gasped in sequence. It shouldn't be like this. Her brother was purposely saying this as if he didn't want Terra to be in their kingdom, and she knew exactly why he was doing this. Beirut's words were unclear to follow. Indeed, Terra now had silver-white hair, but they weren't even sure that she was the only woman in the world with that specific appearance. What if there was another woman with icy blue eyes and silver-white hair? And what if that was the woman Beirut describing? Things were still too uncertain. As much as Xenia wanted to think otherwise, most of Beirut's predictions and future sight were very vague and unclear, to the point that her master himself sometimes had a hard time interpreting or deciphering the message of his visions. If Ebodia doesn't want you, then how about you come with me after this war ends? Esme quickly issued a counteroffer with a wide smile. The kingdom of Valkrez will welcome you with arms wide open, dear. You will be pampered and well protected to your heart's content. By the sidelines, Xenia could already tell that the vampire princess had an interest in Terra thanks to her gift. She obviously looked so delighted at witnessing how a seer worked firsthand. But I want to serve Ebodia. I can feel it in my heart that this is why I was called for. Ebodia is calling for me, Terra whispered with a shaky voice. The seer then looked directly at Ezekiel and whispered, I've been seeing you in my dreams, then you should stay with Ezekiel as you should, as the future king of Ebodia's guide, Ebodia's seer, Xenia whispered, giving Terra a reassuring smile as the latter looked at her. Thinking back, Xenia knew she should intervene, seeing how conflicted and confused her brother looked at the moment. There was a moment of silence before Gideon and Bardas returned to the tent, the latter pulling some random person behind him as they entered. We've caught him. The spy. Gideon announced as he entered, Bardas dragging a shirtless man on his knees behind him. Throwing the spy before Prince Ezekiel, the man's hands and feet were shackled, and his bare back clearly showed a tattoo of a serpent, the symbol of Helion. I have a message for Prince Ezekiel. Surrender your kingdom now, and we shall spare your innocent humans' lives, the spy relayed with a manic smile. King Devon will spare you and your people only if you will succumb to his rule. Chapter 98. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dark magic, Xenia heard Lurio whisper out. In an instant, the wizard quickly cast a spell at the man, and she could only blink as the serpent tattoo on his back suddenly came to life. Release him, don't go near him, Lurio instructed. Heeding the wizard's instructions, Gideon released the man while he and Bardas kept their distance. In one quick motion, Lurio then made another spell, a round sphere materializing around the man to trap him. Ha! Is this a joke? The man laughed maniacally as his body wriggled, his head coming down as he laid motionless for a split second. Just as quickly, he then raised his head, his eyes now fully black as he smiled. Even his lips had turned black as he cackled menacingly, the tattoo on his back having already disappeared as a chill shot through Xenia's bones. The atmosphere inside the tent became dark and eerie, a telltale sign of dark magic being employed. This wasn't the first time Xenia had encountered black sorcery, but this one felt very different for some reason. It was powerful, and she could just tell that nothing good could ever come off such a thing. Turning to Lurio, she could already see the beads of sweat forming on his forehead, the difficulty of the task in front of him starting to become too much as he wrangled against the dark power. Tell me your answer, Prince Ezekiel. I don't have all day to wait for your decision, the man spoke with a deep and loud voice, a drastically different tone from before his eyes turned black. Surrender now. It's King Devon, Lurio whispered out. This man is just acting as his medium now. Shaking his head, Ezekiel gritted his teeth as he tersely replied, why bother to ask, demon? You already know what our answer will be. Ebodia will never fall in the hands of a demon. Nor will our people succumb to evil. We would rather die and go to heaven than be subjected to your evil deeds. Receiving the prince's reply, the man shook his head with a grin. I see, he then stood up and moved as his eyes searched inside the tent. His gaze in particular darted toward Xenia and Terra. A seer, he drawled out, pointing the fact out with a long and heavy tone as he sneered at Terra. He then shifted his gaze back to Ezekiel and mocked, I see now why you're so confident. I just had Beirut killed, but you've already found Beirut's successor. The man scoffed, very well. I will surely take her with me. It would be such a waste to kill such a beautiful young maiden of a seer. Make sure you keep her safe because I will soon come to take her away from you. What can we do? We have to end this man now, Xenia whispered to Lurio. We've heard enough of his blabbering already. There's no point in keeping this devil alive. Looking at Ezekiel, her brother was still disoriented due to Terra's appearance, and Xenia could only sigh at the humor of the situation before her. Why was nobody doing anything? If only she had her sword with her. She would have already decapitated the spy before he could speak further. Clicking her tongue, Xenia turned her gaze to Atlas and was even about to speak when her body suddenly froze at the sharp stare the spy was giving to her. Turning around, their eyes met, and she swore as her body shuddered in nervousness. "Ah, another remarkable beauty. I presume she's Princess Xenia," the spy maliciously uttered as he seemingly inhaled her scent. "Those forest green eyes are so lovely." He opened his eyes, his lips curling up as he pointed out, "Ah, you're still unmarked and unclaimed, even. Would you prefer my mark then, Princess?" He gloated, "Ha! You better convince your brother and parents to surrender now, dear Princess. I'm willing to make you my queen, though in exchange, I'll bury my fangs right into your neck and mark you till you scream my name in ECS. You! I should kill you where you stand." Darius grunted as he tried to strike the spy down. However, the barrier prevented him from ever reaching the spy. "Remove this barrier at once." Darius barked out in rage. "I'll crush this demon into pieces." The man laughed out loud at the ensuing chaos. It was a mocking laugh as he set his eyes on Xenia. "Ah, isn't this exciting? The werewolf king going amok and all that. Are you scared that I'll steal your future bride?" "Well, you should be, because now that I've laid my eyes on her. I've got a mind in wanting her." The spy then looked back to Ezekiel and stated, "How about this? I'll retreat and cease this war against Ebodia. In exchange, you'll give me this beautiful sister of yours as my wife. I will have Princess Xenia, and I will no longer attack Ebodia. Isn't it a fair trade?" Xenia's body trembled as her eyes met the spy's, his black eyes looking at her intently. With a wide smile and a devilish grin, she had never felt that scared in her life. But before she could even blink or even tear her gaze away from the spy, Darius was already attacking the man right before her eyes. In one swift motion, he cracked the barrier, his hand already holding up the man's neck in one swift motion. Growling, Darius's veins were popping out all over his arms and neck, a testament to the amount of force that he was currently exuding. Already, his human hands were slowly changing into his wolfman form, his claws elongating the longer he held the man aloft. "You will meet death before you can even touch a single hair on my mate. I will send you directly back to hell, you demon," he yelled with gritted teeth, his eyes flaming with red-hot carnage. "Ha! Go ahead. See if that'll." Before the spy could finish his sentence, Darius had already thrown the man's body to the ground, his feet stomping onto his head and crushing his skull in one blow. "Come hell or high water, I'll crush you under my boot," Darius firmly declared, grinding his heel on the dead spy's liquefied brains in disdain. "Send as many as you like. They'll all fall just as you will when I get my hands on you." Chapter 99. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Everyone's mouth fell open at how Darius crushed the spy's head in one swift motion. After all was said and done, Ezekiel was the first one to react when he saw how terrified Xenia was of the gruesome scene. Shaking his head, he didn't waste yet another second as he called for Jaira and instructed, "Please escort my sister back to her tent. And don't leave her alone." He then looked at Tara and followed, "Stay here along with the rest. Or do you need some time to gather your bearings in your tent?" Despite his own admittance, he was still somehow worried for Tara, seeing as the Demon King didn't just threaten to steal Xenia away but to also take Tara along with him. Surely, she must have been scared. "No, Your Highness. I'm fine," Tara replied with a determined tone and a slight bow. "Also, I know that I have to stay by your side. You will need me." Hearing her answer, Ezekiel frowned as he assessed Tara with a quick glance. She had this calm look, a contrast to everyone else inside the room. It was as if she already expected this sequence of events to happen. BL.net A seer. He inwardly took in some air. Beirut hadn't warned him who exactly the woman was. All he got from him was two descriptors about this proverbial woman's physical appearance. Perhaps it was a simple coincidence. What if it wasn't Tara? He could only hope it wasn't her, especially now that she was confirmed to be the seer prophesied to succeed Beirut. Letting out a mental sigh, Ezekiel gave Atlas a knowing look, the latter quickly understanding his intentions as he moved to have somebody clean up the body and the mess before them. Partly turning his gaze, he saw that King Darius was about to leave, probably to follow Xenia out of the tent. Ezekiel called out to him, "King Darius, you have to stay here. We need to talk." At the prince's voice, Darius stopped in his tracks. With a curious gaze, he turned around to face Ezekiel. "My sister. I know her well," Ezekiel directly stated. "The Demon King's words will affect her. Sooner or later, she'll likely make an impulsive move, probably to sacrifice herself this time." He just knew that Xenia would hatch yet another idea in her stressed mental state. Jaira had reported to him about everything that had happened during Beirut's burial rites. He was sure that Xenia would do her best to try and make up for what she thought were her own mistakes. And if she had her way, she might take the risk of offering herself up to the Demon King on the slim chance that the king would keep to his word. "We know that the Demon King wants to rule over the world, and that fact will remain whether or not Xenia becomes his queen," Ezekiel trailed off in thought. "But Xenia? No. I won't take that risk. If we have to keep her locked up till this war is over, then so be it. We have to make sure that she won't hurt herself over something stupid." The prince then took in another breath. Looking at Darius closely, he added, "Please. Keep her in cordon for the time being. I know her well, and I'm afraid she'll do something we both wouldn't want her to." "Why not though?" Esme suddenly chimed in. "Who knows? Maybe Princess Xenia can actually convince the Demon King to Chang." "Stop talking." A loud growl interrupted Esme from speaking further as the vampire princess gulped at how intense Darius's glare was boring into her. "If you can't keep your mouth from spurting out nonsense like that about my mate, then I won't hesitate to ruin the long-time good relationship I share with your kingdom by ripping it off." At Darius's threats, Esme frowned as she scoffed, "Why are you getting so worked up? Fine. Get your mate and keep her safe as her brother requested. I just wanted to state my opinion because we all know that King Devon is someone who can keep his word." She explained herself, "So far I haven't heard of him ever backing out from a promise. We all at least know that he didn't kill the royals from the kingdoms who submitted under his rule. He actually kept his word." In that instant, Esme turned around and immediately stomped out of the tent. Watching the princess leave, Ezekiel knew that Esme had a point. This was why he was worried about Xenia. There was actually a decent chance that the Demon King would keep his promise, and she might just take those odds if it meant securing some semblance of peace. However, there was also no way that they would ever submit to his rule. The Demon King was straight up evil, and every kingdom that fell under his rule turned into hideous backwaters. Yes, he kept them alive, but they were all covered under the shroud of darkness, a black magic that led to sin and insanity. Darius let out a heavy sigh as he looked at Ezekiel. With a serious tone, he replied, "Very well. I won't waste any more time and bring Xenia to my kingdom myself. However, you do know how stubborn your princess could be. We'll be leaving at this instant, but I will need her to be unconscious during the trip." "I understand," Ezekiel nodded. "Lurio will do what's needed. Let me just write a quick letter for her to read once she arrives at Cordon." He then looked at Lurio and instructed, "Prepare something that can knock Xenia unconscious for King Darius to escort her back to Cordon." "Yes, Your Highness," Lurio answered before he quickly left. Ezekiel turned his attention back to Darius. "You must bring Jaira with her." "I assume you'll travel in your wolfman form," the prince postulated. "If so, then please bring enough men with you to guarantee her safety." "Her safety is already guaranteed so long as she's with me," Darius confidently answered. Ezekiel knitted his brows at the king's overconfidence. He was sure that Darius would protect his sister with his life, but he would feel more at ease if the king would bring enough men with him. The king seemed to read his expressions, so he added, "If it will appease your worries, then I'll bring Bardas and Gideon with me along with 5 of my warriors from the Moonlight Cavalry." Darius nodded with a sigh, "I'll take my leave now. Find Xandro and instruct him to follow your every order for this war. If needed, I will send you more of my men as reinforcements once I reach Cordon." "That will be good, your majesty." "That is very much appreciated," the prince gratefully nodded. "Please, spare no more time and prepare to leave at the earliest with my sister. You must stay with her by all means. Don't ever leave her side no matter what." Although Ezekiel was aware that he didn't need to request such a thing from the werewolf king, he just couldn't help but do so anyway. At his request, Darius gave him a reassuring smile and said, "Don't worry. She'll be in good hands, brother.in.law." Chapter 100. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Everyone had already left the room, but Ezekiel remained seated on his chair while staring at Tara, who was also sitting not far from him. He still couldn't believe how Tara had fitted 2 of Beirut's descriptors on the woman that he should supposedly avoid. What kind of joke is this? Should I avoid the seer that can help our kingdom? This is so insane. Ezekiel inwardly mumbled his thoughts. For the first time in his life, he felt conflicted on what to do. He simply couldn't make a firm decision about the matter. Whether or not to drive Tara away was simply beyond him at the moment. Noel.n sighing loudly, he stood up and said to her, "Follow me to my tent." Standing up as well, Tara obeyed him as she followed him to his tent. Signaling her to sit on a nearby chair, he grabbed a blank piece of paper and wrote a quick letter for his sister. Tara simply watched as he wrote, waiting for the prince to issue yet another command. Meanwhile, Ezekiel was busy writing, and as soon as he was finished, he called for Atlas and instructed, "Give this to Jaira. Tell her to give this letter to Xenia once they've arrived at Cordon. Remember, she needs to read this letter by all means." Atlas wordlessly took the letter, but he still had his doubts as he asked, "Your Highness, won't the princess prefer to stay at the Abodia castle with her parents?" Judging by his tone, Ezekiel knew well enough that it was more like a suggestion than a question. He knew exactly why Atlas preferred Xenia to be at Abodia, but it was simply impossible at the moment. Another sigh escaped Ezekiel's lips as he looked at his friend. He could see the hint of begging eyes as clear as day. However, now was the time to straighten things out with Atlas. It would be best that he no longer hold on to any hope he might have left for his sister. It would at least begin the healing process for the inevitable hurt he would have to go through. Atlas was already too late. Maybe if he mustered up the courage before his father decided to go for a marriage alliance, then he could have had a chance to win Xenia's heart. "Atlas, I know this is hard for you, but you have to accept this fact already. I know my sister well, and I can see it in her eyes that she already has growing feelings toward the werewolf king. I know you cherish and love her, but this is her fate, one that we all must accept," Ezekiel carefully explained. "Beirut already foresaw how a powerful man will protect Xenia in the future, and I strongly now believe that it's the werewolf king. As much as I would have hoped otherwise, I'm already at ease in entrusting Xenia in his hands. No one else could better protect Xenia than him, and it is simply a fact." He then looked at Tara and said, "Tell us, Tara. What kind of future do you see for Xenia with the werewolf king? Did you somehow already have a vision about Xenia? I understand that you two already met each other before." Hearing the prince's words, Atlas turned to look at Tara with knitted brows. Alongside Ezekiel, he waited for the seer's words. Ezekiel wasn't sure if Tara had seen Xenia's future yet, but he had a hunch that Tara knew more than what she was saying. Meanwhile, Ezekiel could only wait as he kept stealing glances at Atlas. The man was someone who had great respect and belief in seers, so he was confident that he would snap out of his misery once a seer assured him of Xenia's good future with the werewolf king. Seeing the two men, Tara flashed Atlas a reassuring smile as she said, "There's no safer place for Princess Xenia other than being in the werewolf king's arms. I saw her living a good life with him. It won't be perfect, of course, the two of them facing trials and tribulations ahead, but together, they will triumph over everything. She smiled, such things will only solidify their relationship, their reign in the kingdom of Corden being a welcome one. Ezekiel let out a sigh of relief upon hearing Tara's wonderful foresight. Turning to Altus, his friend's shoulders had drooped upon hearing such revelations. With a smile, he encouraged him, sometimes it's better to let go, especially when we know that it's for the best. I trust that you'll do your best not to dwell on this misfortune, Atlas. Looking down at the ground, Atlas silently bid his leave with a slack expression. Ezekiel could only sigh as he watched his friend leave. He could only hope that Atlas could overcome this heartache soon enough. Turning his eyes back at Tara, the seer was also staring at him in a way that their eyes met. His flaming amber eyes bore against her icy blue stare. Somehow, something in her intrigued him, and there was still some doubt lingering inside him about her circumstances. Although, the more he looked at her, the more he must admit that he had never seen someone as beautiful as Tara. Her silver-white hair and icy blue eyes glinted against the light, a scintillating glow making her shine even more. Black hair might have suited her once, but having silver-white hair like this was too perfect for her. She was too stunning and alluring, and Ezekiel's eyes widened as he quickly shook his head to clear his head. What was wrong with him? This wasn't the time for him to act like this. He shouldn't let his guard down like this. After all, Tara could still be that woman he should be wary of. Your Highness, is there something wrong? Tara asked, barely a whisper. You've been staring at me quite often, and I feel as if something's bothering you. Tell me, Tara, what do you see about me? Ezekiel suddenly asked, his eyes narrowing at the seer. You've mentioned before that you've been seeing me in your dreams. Tell me everything. I'm still unsure of some things, Your Highness. Some of them were blurred in my vision, Tara admitted. All I know is that I must stay with you, Your Highness. You will need me in order to help control your power. The rise of the Dragon King will happen soon, and you won't be able to control Vulcan without me. You need me to rule the world. Ezekiel's eyes darkened as he hissed, You must never mention this to anyone, especially to Xenia or any of my family. Tara looked surprised at how his voice roared. Seeing her reaction, he quickly followed, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. It's just that I don't want my family to worry even more. I understand, Your Highness, Tara promised as soon as she managed to stop herself from shaking. I will never mention this to anyone else, as you requested. A brief silence settled between them. After a while, Ezekiel broke the silence. Vulcan. So that's the name of the dragon inside me right now, he inquired. Yes, Tara nodded. He is the king of all dragons, and he chose you while you were still in your mother's womb. Unfortunately, that's all I know for now. She then added, still, you must overcome his influence in your body. He will try to take over once you turn 30. There will be a transition, and you must never let Vulcan wholly take you over. Instead, you must dominate it to submission. How can I control it then? Ezekiel promptly asked. Tara smiled as she cryptically replied, like I said, I must stay close to you, Your Highness. Ezekiel raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? We'll be stuck with each other, Tara answered. Wherever you go, I go with you. Wherever you stay, I stay by your side. Like now, I must stay with you in your tent like this. Ezekiel couldn't help but sigh at her revelations. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Nevertheless, if that was what it took to keep his family safe, then so be it. A/N. Let's end Ezekiel and Tara's cameo here since his story would be in a different volume or book. Hee hee.